alleys. When I first came out of college, I was happy. When I turned Big Papa Pump, I was very.
Scott Steiner's rise to wrestling stardom was as explosive as his personality, an unforgettable journey from tag team success with his brother Rick to dominating as a powerhouse singles star. At his peak, Scott held the coveted WCW World Heavyweight Championship, flexing not just his muscles but an intense, larger-than-life persona that captivated fans worldwide. But behind the scenes, his fierce ambition, volatile temper, and obsession with control began to unravel what he'd built. Over time, those same traits that made him magnetic also made him difficult to work with, slowly pushing him out of the spotlight. What was once a celebrated main eventer became a mid-card fixture, his talent overshadowed by backstage drama and missed opportunities. Scott's story is a powerful reminder that success in wrestling, like life, is never guaranteed. Humble beginnings, growing up in Bay City, Michigan. Scott Carl Rexiner was born on July 29, 1962, in the small, blue-collar city of Bay City, Michigan. It was the kind of town where everybody knew your name, and life revolved around hard work, community, and a relentless drive to make something out of yourself. Scott's family was no exception to this ethos. The Rexiners were proud German Americans who believed in discipline, perseverance, and earning every bit of success through sweat and grit. Life wasn't easy for the Rexiners. Money was tight and luxuries were rare, but Scott's parents were determined to provide a stable, structured home where values like respect, accountability, and toughness were instilled early on. His father held various blue-collar jobs over the years, whether it was factory work or construction, and approached every task with quiet determination. Meanwhile, Scott's mother ran the household with a firm hand, making sure both Scott and his older brother Rick understood that nothing would ever be handed to them without effort. This upbringing laid the foundation for Scott's relentless pursuit of excellence. Discipline wasn't just a word in the Rexiner household, it was a way of life. If you want something, Scott would later recall, you had to work for it every single day. The lessons learned in those early years would become both his greatest strength and, in time, a source of deep personal struggle. A natural athlete, high school years at Bay City Western. By the time Scott reached Bay City Western High School, it was clear he was no ordinary kid. Standing out not just for his size but for an intense focus that bordered on obsession, Scott was the kind of athlete every coach dreamed of having on their team. Whether on the football field or the wrestling mat, he played with a fire that electrified those around him. On the wrestling mat, Scott's combination of raw power and cerebral skill was rare. He didn't just rely on his strength, he understood leverage, timing, and technique in a way that made him a formidable opponent. Coaches often remarked on his ability to think 3 moves ahead, adapting mid-match to counter his opponent's strategy. That blend of brawn and brains earned him respect and multiple championships at the high school level. On the football field, Scott was equally dominant. Playing various positions, sometimes on offense, sometimes defense, he was a relentless force who refused to back down. His teammates remember him as someone who pushed not only himself but everyone around him. If Scott was grinding through another round of drills after practice, one former teammate once said, you knew he wasn't going to let you quit either. One particularly vivid story that stuck with many from those days involved Scott's wrestling coach having to physically pull him away from the gym after a brutal training session. Scott simply refused to stop training. His drive to improve, to be better than everyone else, was so intense that it sometimes worried those closest to him. Losing wasn't just disappointing, it was personal. His frustration in defeat often spilled over into visible anger, a sign of how much the sport meant to him. Collegiate glory, the University of Michigan years. After high school, Scott's journey took him to the prestigious University of Michigan, where he wrestled from 1983 to 1986. This was a crucial period, one that would elevate him from a standout high school athlete to a nationally recognized competitor. Wrestling in the NCAA Division I arena wasn't just a step up, it was a complete transformation. Scott excelled, earning All-American honors and placing 6th in the 1986 National Championships, a feat that placed him among the elite collegiate wrestlers in the country. He was also a 3-time runner-up in the fiercely competitive Big Ten Conference. But Scott wasn't just a competitor, he was a leader. Named team captain, he became the emotional and motivational core of the Michigan wrestling squad. This leadership role was not just symbolic, it required balancing the pressure of high-level competition with the responsibility of guiding younger teammates through the grueling season. Off the mat, Scott was serious about his future. Unlike the wild, intense persona he would later adopt in the wrestling world, his college years showed a more grounded side. He maintained solid grades and initially dreamed of becoming a high school teacher, an interesting contrast to the aggressive, Big Papa Pump character that would eventually capture wrestling fans' imaginations. This period was about growth, not just physical, but mental and emotional. Scott was honing discipline, learning how to handle pressure, and shaping his identity in a way that would inform his future career. The turning point, from amateur wrestling to professional wrestling. Transitioning from the structured, competitive world of amateur wrestling to the theatrical, entertainment-driven realm of professional wrestling was far from straightforward for Scott. While still at the University of Michigan, both Scott and his brother Rick began exploring the world of pro wrestling. Rick was already fascinated by the business, but Scott was initially hesitant. The thought of trading a stable, respected career as a teacher for the unpredictable world of professional wrestling made him pause. However, as his amateur wrestling career came to a close, the excitement and opportunity of professional wrestling grew harder to resist. The allure wasn't just about fame or money, it was about expressing himself in a new way and pushing the boundaries of athletic performance. Their early training was under the watchful eye of Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. in Toledo, Ohio. This mentorship went beyond simple wrestling moves. It was about understanding storytelling, psychology, and showmanship, the core elements that differentiate pro wrestling from amateur competition. Scott had to shift his mindset dramatically. No longer was it just about winning or losing. It was about entertaining crowds, building characters, and creating moments that would resonate for years. His legitimate athletic background gave him a huge advantage. Few wrestlers could match his strength, conditioning, or technical skills. But learning to work with opponents, selling moves convincingly, and engaging an audience were new skills that required patience and adaptation. The birth of the Steiner Brothers, revolutionizing tag team wrestling. Scott and Rick officially debuted as a tag team in 1986, launching what would become one of the most influential duos in wrestling history. Their early days were humble, wrestling small shows in rural towns for modest pay, often performing in front of handfuls of fans in cramped high school gyms or community centers. The journey was exhausting and far from glamorous, but it was the crucible that forged their unique style. What set the Steiners apart was the way they fused Scott's technical brilliance with Rick's raw power and aggression. Scott's wrestling innovations, especially the creation of the Frankensteiner, a breathtaking flip from the shoulders that combined athleticism, precision, and timing, became their signature move and a highlight in every match. The Frankensteiner was more than just flashy, it was a technical marvel that pushed the boundaries of what was possible in professional wrestling. Their hard-hitting, intense style brought new energy to the tag team scene, and by 1988, they had developed a reputation for delivering brutal, physically demanding matches. Their battles against legendary teams like the Road Warriors and Doom became the stuff of wrestling lore, contests that told compelling stories of brotherhood, grit, and relentless willpower. These early years laid the foundation for the Steiners' rise to superstardom, but they also sowed the seeds of future tension, as Scott's ambitions and desire for individual recognition began to grow alongside the team's success. Championship success and international acclaim. For Scott and Rick Steiner, all the countless hours on the road, the long drives through small towns, and the relentless grind finally paid off. On November 1, 1989, the Steiner brothers captured their first major championship by defeating the legendary Fabulous Freebirds for the NWA WCW World Tag Team titles. This victory was more than just a belt, it was a moment of validation. After years of hard work and countless battles in less glamorous venues, they had arrived at the pinnacle of tag team wrestling. Their dominance was not limited to American wrestling. The brothers made a significant impact in Japan's New Japan Pro Wrestling, NJPW, a promotion famous for its respect for technical skill and intense, hard-hitting matches. Wrestling in Japan demanded a different kind of performance, longer bouts, methodical pacing, and an emphasis on genuine athleticism rather than flashy theatrics. For the Steiners, this was a perfect fit. Their blend of power, precision, and intensity made them stars overseas, and they even claimed the IWGP Tag Team Championship, cementing their status as an international force. Fans in Japan admired how Scott and Rick brought something authentic to their matches, a blend of American grit and respect for wrestling as a sport. The Steiners were not just entertainers, they were competitors, and their performances on that stage deepened their legacy and widened their fanbase. Breaking into the big time, WWF run, 1992 to 1994. By the early 1990s, the Steiner Brothers were ready to step onto an even bigger stage. Their move to the World Wrestling Federation, WWF, gave them a national platform unlike any they had seen before. It was a new era in wrestling, one that blended athleticism with entertainment, where larger-than-life characters and storylines were king. The Steiners wasted no time making their mark. They appeared on the very first episode of Monday Night Raw, instantly becoming one of the top teams in the WWF's competitive tag division. Their natural charisma, combined with undeniable skill, won over fans and critics alike. During their WWF tenure, the Steiners captured the WWF Tag Team Championship twice. This success was a testament to their versatility. They could excel in the WWF's entertainment-focused environment just as well as they had in the more sports-oriented WCW. Wrestling magazines and critics regularly hailed them as the best tag team in the world, praising their unique ability to satisfy both hardcore wrestling fans and casual viewers. Their matches ranged from technical masterpieces that showcased Scott's wrestling IQ to high-energy brawls that thrilled the audience, yet beneath the surface of this success, the pressures of the wrestling world began to show their effects, especially on Scott. The cracks begin to show. Scott's changing persona and physical transformation. By the mid-1990s, things started to shift. The strain of being wrestling's premier tag team, and the constant demands of the business, began to wear on the brothers, but it was Scott who underwent the most noticeable changes. Around 1995, Scott's personality started to evolve. Where once he had been focused and cooperative, his demeanor grew more aggressive and confrontational, both inside and outside the ring. His interactions with opponents took on a sharper edge, and tension between him and Rick began to surface, sometimes spilling over into their matches and backstage conversations. The most visible change was physical. Scott embarked on an intense bodybuilding regimen, devoting hours every day to packing on muscle mass. Unlike the lean, agile conditioning that had made him such a formidable wrestler, Scott's new focus was sheer size and brute strength. The transformation was startling. Fans and fellow wrestlers often did double takes when they saw him after a short absence. His once powerful frame had grown massive, bordering on overwhelming. This dramatic change altered Scott's wrestling style. Gone was the nimble, technically sound wrestler who combined finesse with force. In his place was a powerhouse who relied heavily on raw strength and intimidation. Some fans welcomed the new, Big Papa Pump persona, but others worried it was a departure from the foundation that had made him great. Wrestling insiders whispered about whether Scott was sacrificing skill for spectacle. Backstage battles and mounting frustrations. Scott's physical transformation was just one facet of a larger, more troubling shift in his attitude backstage. Once a professional and cooperative presence in creative meetings and booking decisions, Scott began to grow increasingly demanding and difficult to work with. He openly questioned why the Steiner brothers were not getting better storylines or more prominent placements on the card. Unlike before, when booking discussions might have been collaborative, Scott's approach became confrontational and relentless. He pushed hard for creative control, wanting influence over match outcomes, promos, and story arcs. Promoters and bookers found themselves constantly negotiating with a wrestler who was unwilling to compromise. This difficult behavior extended beyond professional disagreements. By 1996, rumors swirled about Scott's personal life and mental state. One notable incident involved an arrest related to a suspended license, hinting at struggles beneath the surface that went far beyond wrestling. Many who knew Scott sensed he was wrestling with more than just professional pressures. The competitive fire that had driven him for years was now mixed with frustration, ambition, and perhaps personal turmoil. The growing rift, brothers at a crossroads. For Scott and Rick, the wrestling ring was more than a workplace, it was family. Together, they had built a legacy that few tag teams could match, and their bond as brothers was an integral part of their success. Their chemistry was a perfect balance. Scott's technical skill complemented Rick's raw power, and together they created matches that fans loved. But as the mid-1990s approached, the relationship began to fray. What started as professional disagreements soon deepened into personal conflicts. Scott was struggling internally. Proud of the success they had achieved together, he increasingly felt boxed in by the tag team role. For all its benefits, wrestling alongside Rick was limiting Scott's dreams of individual stardom. He wanted to step out of the shadow of the Steiner Brothers, to stand alone in the spotlight, and to prove himself as a singles competitor. Backstage conversations grew tense and emotionally charged. Scott passionately argued for singles matches and storylines that highlighted his unique abilities. He looked to other wrestlers, Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, even former tag team wrestlers like The Rock, who had successfully transitioned to singles careers. Why can't we be next? Scott demanded, his voice rising with intensity and his eyes blazing with determination. Rick, on the other hand, was more comfortable with the status quo. He valued their partnership and the brotherhood they shared, reluctant to disrupt the successful formula they had developed. For Rick, the bond and routine were important, not just professionally, but personally. The differences in their ambitions created a palpable tension, a slow-burning conflict that most fans never saw but was deeply felt backstage. The brothers stood at a crossroads, their relationship tested by competing dreams and changing identities. The obsession with strength, bodybuilding as more than a hobby. For Scott Steiner, bodybuilding was never just about looking good or staying fit, it became an all-consuming obsession, a means to assert control amid the chaos of professional wrestling and his own turbulent emotions. What started as a way to build on his natural athleticism soon turned into a lifestyle defined by rigorous discipline and relentless pursuit of physical perfection. Every day began before dawn, often well before his wrestling peers were stirring. While others were still in bed, Scott was already in the gym, surrounded by clanking weights and the low hum of machines. It wasn't uncommon for him to spend 6 to 8 hours a day training, breaking his workouts into multiple sessions to focus on different muscle groups with surgical precision. His regimen was painstaking. No detail was left to chance, from the exact number of reps per set to the timing of each meal. Scott meticulously planned his nutrition, measuring protein intake to the gram and timing carbohydrates to optimize muscle growth and recovery. Protein shakes, chicken breasts, egg whites, and carefully portioned vegetables became staples of his diet. Friends and family noticed how his world shrank to the size of a gym and a kitchen stocked with supplements, but this obsession was about more than just muscle. For Scott, bodybuilding was a kind of refuge, a way to channel frustration and ambition into something concrete and controllable. In an industry rife with uncertainty, where storylines could change overnight and egos clashed constantly, his muscles were something he could shape with his own hands. He was building not just a physique, but an identity. Life narrowed, the social cost of obsession. As Scott's physical focus deepened, so too did the narrowing of his life outside the gym. Invitations to social events, casual hangouts, and even family dinners were routinely declined if they conflicted with training or meal schedules. The world beyond bodybuilding and wrestling seemed to shrink, and with it, Scott's connections to friends and loved ones began to fray. Those close to him watched with concern as Scott became more insular. Time that might once have been spent relaxing or catching up with old friends was now consumed by protein shakes, rest periods, and strict sleep routines designed to maximize muscle repair. Socializing, once a balm for the pressures of the wrestling road, became a distraction from the regimen he held sacred. Some colleagues worried that Scott's obsession bordered on unhealthy. They saw a man who was physically imposing yet emotionally distant, locked in a cycle where the gym was both sanctuary and prison. The relentless pursuit of size wasn't just about performance, it seemed like an attempt to build a shield around himself, a way to protect against the uncertainties and conflicts gnawing at him backstage and within his personal life. A locker room on edge, living with volatility. Scott's changing physicality was matched by a volatility in his personality that unsettled those around him. Where once he had been approachable and collaborative, he became unpredictable and intimidating. Mood swung rapidly, one moment he could be focused and engaging, the next he might explode in anger over a perceived slight or disagreement. This volatility created a tense atmosphere in the locker room. Wrestlers who had worked alongside Scott for years found themselves walking on eggshells, uncertain how to navigate conversations or interactions without triggering an outburst. Friendly banter gave way to cautious exchanges, with colleagues carefully choosing words to avoid conflict. The shift wasn't only emotional, it had professional consequences. Scott's cooperative spirit deteriorated. Where he had once been open to creative input, booking decisions, and storyline compromises, he now frequently resisted, pushing back against suggestions and demanding greater control. His sense of dissatisfaction grew, fueled by a perception that he was undervalued or underutilized. Promoters and bookers found themselves in difficult negotiations, often confronted by a Scott Steiner who was unwilling to bend. His relentless drive and larger-than-life ego made collaboration challenging. While many wrestlers understand the balance of ego and teamwork, Scott's balance seemed to tilt toward the former, complicating relationships in a tightly knit community where cooperation is key. The breaking point, the infamous betrayal at Super Brawl 8. All these tensions, emotional, physical, professional, reached a boiling point on February 22, 1998, at Super Brawl 8, an event forever etched into wrestling history. During a high-stakes tag team championship match against the Outsiders, Scott Steiner stunned fans and colleagues alike by turning on his own brother, Rick. The moment was seismic, both on screen and behind the scenes. To casual viewers, it was a shocking storyline twist, a betrayal that immediately reshaped the narrative. But for insiders, it was the culmination of years of pent-up resentment, ambition, and personal conflict that had been simmering beneath the surface. Scott's heel turn was raw, electric, and charged with genuine emotion that blurred the line between performance and reality. It wasn't just a scripted act. It was a release of frustrations accumulated over time. The match became a landmark, symbolizing not only the end of the Steiner Brothers as a tag team but the start of Scott's full embrace of a new identity as a singles competitor. The betrayal wasn't easy for Rick either. Watching his brother turn against him publicly was a painful fracture of both family and professional bonds. The wrestling world watched as a beloved duo dissolved in front of their eyes, replaced by a narrative of conflict and transformation. Reinventing Big Papa Pump, from athlete to icon. With his new path clear, Scott Steiner fully reinvented himself as Big Papa Pump, a character that drew inspiration from wrestling legend, superstar, Billy Graham but elevated to new extremes. This wasn't just our brand, it was a full transformation into a hypermasculine, physically dominant icon. Big Papa Pump was a spectacle. Scott dyed his hair and beard a striking platinum blonde, creating a look that was impossible to ignore. His bulky frame, now enhanced by years of obsessive bodybuilding, was clad in flashy, chainmail-like wrestling gear that gleamed under the arena lights. Every entrance was a statement, a mountain of muscle exuding confidence, menace, and swagger. But it was more than just appearance. Scott's promos became legendary for their provocative bravado and raw energy. His words crackled with sexual confidence and biting arrogance, captivating audiences even if they polarized them. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a force of nature, larger than life and impossible to ignore. The character tapped into something primal, a celebration of strength, masculinity, and dominance. Yet beneath the spectacle, there was also a vulnerability, an almost desperate need to prove himself, to break free from old labels and claim a new place at the top. Joining the NWO Wolfpack, finding a new stage. Big Papa Pump's arrival coincided perfectly with the rise of one of the most influential wrestling factions of the 1990s, the New World Order, NWO, Wolfpack. Joining this rebellious, anti-establishment group gave Scott an immediate platform to showcase his new persona on a grand scale. The NWO's edgy, chaotic energy matched Scott's volatile intensity like a perfect storm. His muscle-flexing routines became ritualistic displays of dominance, ritualistic and theatrical moments that energized crowds and underscored his new identity. However, the demands of maintaining Big Papa Pump's image came with costs. The cycle of endless gym sessions, strict diet, and physical maintenance locked Scott into a relentless routine that sometimes came at the expense of his in-ring technique and storytelling finesse. The focus on sheer power occasionally overshadowed the subtlety and technical mastery that had made him a standout performer in his earlier career. Still, within the NWO, Scott flourished. He was no longer just one half of a tag team, he was a main event star, a wrestler who commanded attention with every flex, every promo, every explosive move in the ring. For a time, Big Papa Pump was unstoppable. The Steiner math phenomenon, iconic, confounding, and unforgettable. Among the many memorable chapters in Scott Steiner's career, few moments have captured the imagination of wrestling fans quite like his Steiner math promos. These speeches were as iconic as they were bewildering, an unpredictable cocktail of bravado, pseudoscience, and raw personality that blurred the line between genius and madness. Scott wasn't just cutting a promo, he was performing a spectacle, one where numbers and percentages tumbled out of his mouth like an oracle's cryptic riddle. His delivery was passionate, filled with the kind of fiery conviction that made you believe he genuinely calculated every possible outcome of a wrestling match, no matter how illogical. When he claimed he had a 141 2/3% chance of victory, it wasn't just a statement, it was a declaration that transcended normal logic, asserting his dominance in a way only Scott could. These promos didn't follow any conventional mathematics. Odds exceeding 100%. Equations with no basis in reality. That didn't matter. What mattered was the energy, the intensity, and the larger-than-life character Scott had become. Steiner math quickly became a fan-favorite catchphrase, a meme-worthy moment that has endured long beyond its original airing. It was proof that sometimes, in wrestling, the spectacle and personality outweigh pure coherence. Fans loved it because it was so authentically Scott, confident, unapologetic, and unpredictable. Beneath the humor and chaos, though, these promos also offered a glimpse into Scott's own internal struggles. The fragmented logic mirrored the complexities of a man wrestling with his identity and place in the industry. His numbers might not have added up, but the emotions behind the words, pride, frustration, ambition, were real and raw. Controversy and conflict, the dark side of stardom. While Big Papa Pump was wildly popular, the character's success came with a shadow. Scott Steiner's promos were often laced with crude, sexually explicit remarks that pushed the boundaries of what WCW's broadcast standards were comfortable with. This edge, while giving him heat and making his character more magnetic, also stirred controversy. One of the most infamous examples was his bitter feud with Diamond Dallas Page, DDP. Scott's promos included harsh, personal comments about DDP's wife Kimberly, crossing a line that blurred the scripted rivalry with very real animosity. It made the feud emotionally charged, but also uncomfortable, as fans and insiders could feel the tension spilling over from storyline to reality. Off the screen, Scott's volatility only intensified. The 1998 incident in Atlanta, involving a confrontation with a Department of Transportation worker, grabbed headlines and underscored the growing concern that the line between Scott's in-ring aggression and real-life behavior was disappearing. This was not just a character being edgy for the crowd, this was a man struggling to contain his own fierceness and frustrations. His clashes with management, particularly with creative figures like Vince Russo, became increasingly fraught. What might have started as professional disagreements evolved into confrontations that disrupted the flow of storylines and production schedules. Scott was vocal and unyielding, refusing to back down when he felt his character was being diminished or disrespected. A talent struggling with control, creative battles and backstage tensions. Scott's desire for control over his character and storylines became a defining, and often divisive, aspect of his career. Unlike many wrestlers who willingly followed booking decisions, Scott insisted on maintaining an image of invincibility and dominance. He refused to participate in segments that made him look weak or foolish, and this insistence sometimes put him at odds with writers and producers who had different creative visions. This inflexibility made working with Scott a challenge. Writers never knew if he would stick to the script or abruptly reject a planned segment at the last minute, forcing them to scramble to adjust storylines. The unpredictability created a pressure cooker environment where tension simmered just beneath the surface. Physically, Scott's imposing size and temperament added another layer of intimidation. He wasn't just a large man in the locker room, his psychological presence was equally powerful. Wrestlers often avoided direct confrontation over creative differences, knowing that even a minor disagreement could escalate into something far more volatile. The backstage environment became a complex web of alliances and rivalries. As colleagues navigated the minefield that Scott's temperament created. Some admired his drive and passion, others feared his unpredictable nature. The dynamics around him shaped many careers, for better or worse. Legacy and fallout, the unraveling of a wrestling giant. Scott Steiner's Big Papa Pump era was a high point in many ways. His electrifying performances, unforgettable promos, and physical dominance elevated him to the top of WCW. This period included a prestigious WCW World Heavyweight Championship run in 2000, solidifying his place among wrestling's elite. However, the same intensity and volatility that propelled Scott to stardom also sowed seeds of alienation. Colleagues and management alike grew wary of his unpredictability and the backstage drama that often accompanied him. The difficult balance between talent and temperament made Scott both a valued asset and a potential liability. When WCW folded in 2001, Scott's reputation was a double-edged sword. His undeniable skill and star power were clear, but stories of backstage conflicts and creative battles followed him. Promoters and companies recognized his ability to draw crowds and generate excitement, but they also hesitated, cautious about the challenges his personality might bring to locker rooms and creative teams. His career post-WCW reflected this complex legacy. Scott continued to wrestle and entertain, but the shadow of his past controversies and volatility loomed large, complicating his opportunities and relationships within the industry. A complex portrait of ambition, talent, and turmoil. Scott Steiner's journey from tag team hero to solo superstar is far from a simple story of success. It's a nuanced portrait of a man driven by a potent mix of ambition, talent, and deeply personal struggles. His transformation into Big Papa Pump was as much an internal wrestling match as it was a shift in character. Wrestling with personal demons, physical obsessions, and creative battles, Scott's story reveals the human side of a profession often dismissed as mere spectacle. His legacy extends beyond the titles he won or the moves he innovated. It lives in the chaotic brilliance of Steiner math, the heat of controversial promos, and the intensity he brought every time he stepped into the ring. It's a legacy that reminds us wrestling is a world inhabited by real people, complex, flawed, passionate, and sometimes broken. In the end, Scott Steiner's career is a testament to the power and peril of ambition. It's a story about the desire to be great, the cost of chasing that greatness, and the complicated humanity that lies beneath the muscle, bravado, and spectacle. Stay informed. Stay updated. Hit that subscribe button.